Hello and welcome to UMD News for this hour. I'm Shimelis Gebremichael. In the headlines, Tigray authorities say ready for AU-led peace talks. AU also extends Horn Envoy's mission. US extends sanctions against Ethiopian officials involved in Tigray conflict. Egypt's foreign minister calls for Jared deal as soon as possible in meeting with UN Horn of Africa envoy. And now we'll move into the news in details. We invite you all to stay with the program. In the meantime, please do not forget to like and share our programs and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is UMD News with me, Shimelis Gebremichael. First up, Tigray authority says ready for AU-led peace talks. The Tigray administration says it expects a credible peace process with mutually acceptable mediators to negotiate with Ethiopian government. The Tigray authorities expressed their readiness to take part in peace talks led by the African Union, removing an obstacle to potential negotiations with the government to end almost 2 years of fighting. The announcement was made amid a flurry of international diplomacy after fighting flared last month for the first time in months in northern Ethiopia, ruining a humanitarian truce. A statement by the authorities in Tigray said the government of Tigray is prepared to participate in a robust peace process under the auspices of the African Union. The administration further expressed its view that it is ready to abide by an immediate and mutually agreed cessation of hostilities to create a conducive atmosphere. On Monday, the White House said it welcomes the announcement. Al Jazeera quoted White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre as saying that it is high time for both sides to stop fighting and turn to dialogue to resolve their differences. She said Ethiopia should seize this moment to give peace a chance and that Eritrea and others should stay out of the conflict. There was no immediate comment about the announcement from the Ethiopian government, which has long insisted that any peace process must be brokered by the Addis Ababa headquartered African Union. Meanwhile, AU extends Horn Envoy's mission amid Ethiopia peace push. The African Union said Saturday it has extended the mandate of Horn of Africa envoy Olusegun Obasanjo, who is leading a renewed push for peace in Ethiopia after a resurgence of fighting. These whole process are welcomed by the Tigray authorities leader, or the Tigray People's Liberation Front leader, Dr. Gebremichael, earlier this week proposed a conditional truce in a letter sent to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and called for the creation of a credible panel of international mediators. The statement issued by Tigray government on September the 11th, 2022, calls for credible AU-led peace process, implement mutually acceptable mediators, international observers serving as mutual trust builders and guidance, finalizing a comprehensive negotiated ceasefire and an all-inclusive political dialogue. Getachew Redda and General Tzadkan Gebretensai has already been given the mandate to represent the government of Tigray in the future negotiations. U.S. extends sanctions against Ethiopian officials involved in Tigray conflict. President Joe Biden has renewed the sanctions imposed on Ethiopian officials involved in the Tigray conflict or war, pointing out that the situation in the Horn of Africa continues to pose a threat to the United States' national security and foreign policy. According to Sudan Tribune, the extension of the sanctions for an additional 1 year comes 2 weeks after fierce fighting erupted in northern Ethiopia between the government and the regional Tigray forces, ending a humanitarian ceasefire committed last March by both warring parties. Biden said in a presidential statement issued on Friday that the situation in and regarding northern Ethiopia continues to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. Moreover, Biden's statement underscored that the current situation in North Ethiopia is still characterized by activities that threaten the peace, security, and stability of the country and the Horn of Africa region, highlighting widespread violence, atrocities, and serious human rights abuses. It added, for this reason, the national emergency declared on September 17, 2021 must continue in effect beyond September 17, 2022. In September 2021, President Biden signed an executive order that allows the U.S. government to impose sanctions against those responsible for committing a range of serious human rights abuses in northern Ethiopia. The bill was also intended to impose sanctions on certain officials responsible for blocking food aid deliveries or for taking other sanctions to fuel the civil war in Ethiopia's Tigray region. The executive order, among others, authorized the Secretary of Treasury to deny visas and freeze the assets and interest in property of individuals and entities who threaten the peace, security, or stability of Ethiopia, or that have the purpose or effect of expanding or extending the crisis in northern Ethiopia or obstructing a ceasefire or a peace process. The sanctions also include other provisions for our listeners and viewers to read. And finally, Egypt's foreign minister called for Jared deal as soon as possible in meeting with UN Horn of Africa envoy. Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry reiterated Egypt's firm stance on the need to reach a comprehensive agreement on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, shortly named as Jared, as soon as possible in a meeting on Sunday with the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Hannah Tate. According to Ahram Online News, Shoukry warned that the continuation of the status quo on the Jared represents an element of instability that threatens the interests of the peoples of the region for current and future generations, a statement by the Egyptian raid. Egypt and Sudan's tensions with Ethiopia have heightened as the latter proceeds with its plans to implement a third phase of filling the Jared reservoir without the consent of the downstream countries. Egypt and Sudan have reiterated their rejection of the unilateral Ethiopian acts regarding the 4.2 billion Jared, including filling its 74 billion cubic meter reservoir and operating the dam turbines without their consent. The two downstream countries have repeatedly affirmed their support for Ethiopia's right to development, but also called on Addis Ababa to sign a binding agreement on the filling or operation of the dam that would secure their water rights and their people's interest. African Union sponsored talks to find a solution to the Jared dispute between the three countries have been called or stalled since April last year, with Egypt and Sudan blaming the failure of talks on the upstream countries' intransigence. Amid the stalled talks, Egypt and Sudan have called for the engagement of the quarter made up of the UN and the AU, the United States, and the European Union to mediate the Jared talks, a step that Ethiopia has rejected. Ahram Online News also include other information pertaining to Jared. Please read the publication for further idea on the matter. Well, dear viewers and listeners, with that we come to the end of the news for today. This has been UMD Media News with me, Shimelis Gebremichael. Thank you for watching and have a good one.